Hello everybody, my name is Dr. Eggman. I'd like to welcome you all to our first episode of Season 4 of Sonic and Friends Read. Today, I will be reading you all Chapter 1, Mrs. Gorf from Sideway Stories from Wayside School. Now, Sideway Stories from Wayside School is, of course, Bailey Maloney's favorite childhood books when she was a kid. And she asked us to read this. I decided I should actually start this off. What a nice way to start Season 4 of Sonic and Friends Read. Now let's go. Let's get reading. Mrs. Gorf had a long tongue and pointed ears. She was the meanest teacher in Wayside School. She taught the class on the 30th story. If you children are bad, she warned, or if you answer a problem wrong, I'll wiggle my ears, stick out my tongue, and turn you into apples. Mrs. Gorf didn't like children, but she loved apples. Joe couldn't add, so he couldn't count. He couldn't even count. But he knew that if he answered a problem wrong, he would be turned into an apple. So he copied from John. He didn't like to cheat, but Mrs. Gorf had never taught him how to add. One day, Mrs. Gorf caught Joe copying John's paper. She wiggled her ears, first her right one, then her left, stuck out her tongue, and turned Joe into an apple. Then she turned John into an apple for letting Joe cheat. Hey, that isn't fair, said Todd. Joe was only trying to help a friend. Mrs. Gorf wiggled her ears, first her right one, then her left, stuck out her tongue, and turned Todd into an apple. Does anyone else have an opinion? She asked. Nobody said a word. Mrs. Gorf laughed and placed the 3 apples on her desk. Steven started to cry. He couldn't help it. He was scared. Big baby. I do not allow crying in this classroom, big baby, said Mrs. Gorf. She wiggled her ears, first her right one, then her left, stuck out her tongue, and turned Steven into an apple. For the rest of the day, the children were absolutely quiet, and when they went home, they were too scared to even talk to their parents. But Joe, John, Todd, and Steven couldn't go home. Mrs. Gorf just left them on her desk. They were able to talk to each other, but they didn't have much to say. Their parents were very worried. They didn't know where their children were. Nobody seemed to know. The next day, Kathy was late for school. As soon as she walked in, Mrs. Gorf turned her into an apple. Paul sneezed during class. Bless you. He was turned into an apple. Nancy said, God bless you, when John sneezed. Mrs. Gorf wiggled her ears, first her right one, then her left, stuck out her tongue, and turned Nancy into an apple. Terrence fell out of his chair. He was turned into an apple. Marcia tried to run away. She was halfway to the door as Mrs. Gorf's right ear began to wiggle. Then when she reached the door, Mrs. Gorf's left ear wiggled. Marissa opened the door and had one foot outside when Mrs. Gorf stuck out of her tongue. Marissa became an apple. Mrs. Gorf picked up the apple from the floor and put it on her desk with the others. Then a funny thing happened. Mrs. Gorf turned around and fell over a piece of chalk. The 3 Erics laughed. They were turned into apples. Mrs. Gorf had a dozen apples on her desk. Joe, John, Todd, Stephen, Kathy, Paul, Nancy, Terrence, Marissa, and the 3 Erics. Eric Fry, Eric Bacon, and Eric Ovens. Louis, the art teacher, walked into the classroom. He had missed the children at recess. He had heard that Mrs. Gorf was a mean teacher, so he came up to investigate. He saw the 12 apples on Mrs. Gorf's desk. I must be wrong, he thought. She must be a good teacher if so many children bring her apples. They walked back down to the classroom. The next day, a dozen more children were turning to apples. Louis, the yard teacher, came back into the classroom. He saw 24 apples on Mrs. Gorf's desk. There were only 3 children left in the class. She must be the best teacher in the world, he thought. By the end of the week, all the children were apples. Mrs. Gorf was very happy. Now I can go home, she said. I don't have to teach anymore. I won't have to walk up 30 flights of stairs ever again. You're not going anywhere, shouted Todd. He jumped off the desk and bopped Mrs. Gorf on the nose. The rest of the apples followed Mrs. Gorf. Mrs. Gorf fell to the floor. The apple jumped all over her. The apples jumped all over her. Stop, she shouted, or I'll turn you into applesauce. But the apples didn't stop, and Mrs. Gorf couldn't do nothing about it. Turn us back into children, Todd demanded. Mrs. Gorf had no choice. She stuck out her tongue and wiggled her ears, this time her left one first, then her right, and turned the apples back into children. All right, said Marissa, let's go get Louis. He'll know what to do. No, screamed Mrs. Gorf. I'll turn you back into apples. She wiggled her ears, first her right one, then her left, and stuck out her tongue. But Jenny held up a mirror, and Mrs. Gorf turned herself into an apple. The children didn't know what to do. They didn't have a teacher. Even though Mrs. Gorf was mean, they didn't think it was right to leave her as an apple. But none of them knew how to wiggle their ears. Louis, the yard teacher, walked in. Where's Mrs. Gorf? He asked. Nobody said a word. Boy, am I hungry, said Louis. I don't think Mrs. Gorf would mind if I ate this apple. After all, she always has so many. He picked up an apple, which was really Mrs. Gorf, shining on his shirt, and ate it. And that was Chapter 1, Mrs. Gorf of Chapter 1 of Sideway Stories from Wayside School. What do I think of this chapter? To be perfectly honest, I actually find this really good. Mrs. Gorf is something I can relate with her. She and I are evil. Wow, that's something. Guess we have one thing in common. Well, I'm glad that we have one thing in common. She hates children. I don't know, I may hate children. Beats me. But anyway, do I think of anything negative to say? Well, I kind of feel bad for Mrs. Gorf because she was an epic teacher. She is perfect. She's got to be perfect. She's a perfect assistant for me taking down a blue hedgehog. Yeah, good luck with that. Scram, hedgehog. Sorry about that. But other than that, this chapter is really good. Now, what do you all think of this chapter? Did you like it or did you not? Feel free to let me know in the comment section down below. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have to get to my tea. We're about to plan our next attack on the blue hedgehog and his team. But thank you all very much for watching. This is Dr. Eggman signing off. Bye-bye. What a great way to start off Season 4.